Hello and welcome to my channel Doomed_Jaguar. What Ifs? This story is called Tales from the Deep Blue by Tarhish on fanfiction. Let's begin. The stranger pulled back his hand, and Madar's heart came out with it. That heart was a withered thing, he noted, having shriveled from disuse. Its absence was no great loss. It had stopped beating many years ago. No, the loss of his heart was merely a sentimental concern at this point. The lower half of his torso that had been ripped apart and tossed aside into a dark corner of the immense cavern bothered him more. Now, the half that he had left lay slumped and ragged in his crude stone throne. Fighting had been fierce at first. The Renegade possessed many powers, including absolute control of attractive and repulsive forces. Unfortunately, it did not easily pierce the smoke bombs the invader had brought with him, and Madar's muscles had long since withered away to nothing. He had been forced to rely on two of his helpers instead, and they had not been sufficient defense. Not against this man. The red-coated stranger stroked his luxurious black mustache, looking ludicrously out of place in the smoky, dimly lit cavern. It really was an outfit meant for the sea, after all. "You're pretty tough for a mummy," said the stranger. "Normally this kind of brutality is beneath me, but you just don't seem to want to die." "Then stop," said the old man, the noise raspy and rising off my jaw. "You have nothing to gain from my death. What about a trade? You must be looking for something. If you broke into the barrier placed by the Sage of Six Paths, I can help you find it." The stranger chuckled. "You're of no help to anyone now, wretched ghost. Look at you, wasted, broken, too scared to die properly. So you hang on, and for what? Whatever it was, old man, the world doesn't need you anymore. I bet you have been a real terror 50 years ago. But now is your last chance to smile as you go to your death. Take the opportunity. Most people don't get that chance." With a single swipe of his sword, the stranger cut the cables that had kept Madara functioning even when his body had ceased to truly live. Despite everything, Madara couldn't quite manage to feel angry. He had once been a man consumed with rage, but those emotions had broken down long ago, the responsible chemicals in his brain decaying away as the unnatural decades passed. The black form of Zetsu, his most trustworthy servant, was made manifest, lay crumpled and shredded upon the ground, dissolving into dust even as they spoke. How he had died, the old man couldn't say. Black Zetsu had taken far more severe damage in the past to no effect. The other, lesser, white Zetsu had been even more thoroughly obliterated. Only one other of his helpers remained now. Far away from the cave on a mission. Would it have made the difference? Would Toby's presence have saved him? I doubted it. This fight was over from the moment the stranger had discovered his hiding place. He could have defeated the red-coated stranger himself, if he had been anything more than an old, withered husk. But now, the cave was cut. Uchiha Madara died quietly, the foreign chakra that had sustained him leaving his body. Still, he resolved one day to return. The stranger left the cavernous hall the way he had come, picking his way across the rocky remains of the shattered boulder that had once blocked the entrance. He traveled swiftly back to camp, his vibrant coat contrasting with the earthen colors of the forest. The confidant met him before he got there, stepping alongside the stranger to match his pace. "Roger?" asked the confidant, the question clear. The stranger in the red coat grinned from ear to ear. The poneglyph was right. We're on the right track. The Sage of Six Paths. We know what we're looking for now.
Yeah, man.
Later, a twisted creature with pure white skin returned to Madara's lair, carrying the body of a young boy in Konoha. He was shocked speechless by the carnage that had been wrought before him. He had only been gone for 20 minutes at most. Now his master and his brothers lay dead. He could have helped fight, but instead, he had been busy saving a useless child. The boy that Toby had brought with him, Uchiha Obito, had been partially crushed by a tremendous boulder and would surely die without his aid. But it all seemed so unimportant now. Dropping the boy, Toby collapsed to his knees, kicking up the dust of decades. He couldn't even cry. It was just one of the many bodily functions that he was incapable of performing. He was nothing but a lump of functional pseudo-flesh that existed to carry out his master's whims. How could he have any hope of fulfilling Madara's plan with without the help of his brothers? Unless, after a minute, Toby turned to regard the young Uchiha child, unconscious, with great effort. Toby poured himself into the task of healing the boy, using his unique cells based on stock of the legendary first Hokage of Konoha. It hadn't really been explained to him just why that man's cells worked the way they did, but he'd always sort of pictured the ancient Hokage as a sort of weird, blobby meat monster. The young boy's flesh, bone, and brain were rebuilt before Toby's very eyes as his own body filled into pieces, repairing, reconnecting, and extrapolating. Pulse recovered, breathing restarted, blood pressure climbing. Everything was looking good, but then everything went wrong. Toby felt it with a strange certainty, as if the child's body was speaking to him. With skillful hands, he unwrapped the child's flesh and bone to expose the material underneath, and he could see that the brain was dead. He had waited too long, and now too much of it had unraveled from lack of blood flow. Again, he wanted to cry. The plan that Lord Madara and Big Brother Zetsu had concocted was tremendous in scope, far too much for Toby to handle alone. The kid could have helped see the plan through to completion. He had survived, but maybe Toby stared at the form of the brain-dead child. He stared at the brain and at the wrinkles and twists and folds of his cortex. The boy's brain really looked a lot like Toby's own body. He considered, swirly and lumpy, and wait a minute, with a rising, bewildered hope. Toby uncoiled the white pseudo-flesh of his own hands and merged with the brain once more. Tendrils reaching out to encompass and meld with each cell. He invaded, overwrote, and assimilated. As he reached the brainstem, he felt it. It was a distinct sense of year. Toby had never felt years before. Toby had never been more excited in his life. 2 years later, cavern underneath the land of Earth. Silence reigned in the underground cavern. There was no movement of air. Even noise was alien to this place. In nearly 1,000 years, the sanctity of its isolation had only been breached once. No water, fungus, or even bacteria lived in the perfect, sterile dust of the cave. There was no light, after all, none whatsoever. In its center sat a dark, stone tablet, etched with numerous strange and indecipherable glyphs. Then, suddenly, there was a man in the room. The dust, long settled into a motionless retirement, shook itself awake and danced around the room, the air pressure increasing from the sudden arrival of extra matter in the sealed cavern. That air was stale, as if only begrudgingly allowing itself to be breathed. It had had a nice gig, sitting peacefully in the cavern for 1,000 years, not being respired by all sorts of organic creatures. Toby didn't care for the plight of the air. He breathed grandly and with great fulfillment. In fact, he let out a small fart just because he finally could. The immense stone slab in the center of the room remained unmoved by these antics. Toby, robed in black, approached the stone. He wore a wooden mask that looked like driftwood, warped and twisted on one side, bleached almost white by the sun and salt, a tribute to a departed brother. After a time, Toby removed the mask, though it was completely dark. Toby's eyes now saw much more than mere light. He could view the etchings on the stone with perfect clarity. His face was that of the child he had stolen it from. Not only his face was childlike, but the expressions it wore were still filled with innocent and unfiltered emotions. Toby had discovered early on that the mask he wore was necessary to prevent people from reading him like an open book. A real face was so expressive, and he just hadn't had enough practice yet at concealing his feelings. Besides, the eyes tended to startle people. Both of his eyes showed the concentric circle pattern of Madara's Rinnegan. His chakra flowed out from his body, washing in waves over the room, and his eyes picked up all of its reflections, tracing the contours of each surface and the carvings of the rough stone slab before him. Despite the perfect darkness, he saw the room painted in shades of his own energy. Toby scanned the tablet in the center of the room very carefully. There was no doubt that this was what the stranger had been searching for. It certainly wasn't any language he was familiar with, but he felt a sort of itching sensation behind his eyeballs as he read it. When he let that feeling go, the Rinnegan started pulsing with chakra and interpreting the tablet on its own, shoving the data back down the optic nerve. This was almost certainly what Lord Madara had meant when he had spoken of the legendary eyes deciphering the stone tablets of the Uchiha clan. That meant that this was another similar relic. Madara and Big Brother Black Zetsu had felt these tablets were terribly important, but unfortunately they'd rarely involve them in their plotting. Toby read the stone carefully, and and continued reading. There really was a lot there. On the stone was written a strange, almost unbelievable story. It spoke of a divine tree, which he knew about already. It spoke of a fruit that grew every 1,000 years, which he had also known about. He had paid some attention. After all, it was just the rest of it that seemed a bit strange. Toby stood transfixed by the story for what seemed like hours. One thing was for certain. Lord Madara hadn't known about any of this. The plan, as it was, had been as such: gather power, and then use that power to seal away the 9-tailed beasts inside the ghetto statues one by one, to stop a order. Once all 9 had been captured, use the Rinnegan to resurrect Madara, allowing him to become the Jinchuriki, the combined being of the 10 tails. In doing so, the 10 tails would take form like the legendary divine tree. Madara would recover his eyes and, with the aid of that tree, bind the world in an eternal cocoon, an unending illusion that would grant peace and a true heaven to every living being. Honestly, it had all seemed a little complicated. This tablet suggested that all of that planning had been a waste. According to this, the real tree was still out there, which was so incredibly strange. Black Zetsu had been absolutely clear that the only way to do this was to hunt down the tailed beasts. If Madara had known that the original divine tree was still around, surely he would have tried to find it and use it to implement the Eye of the Moon strategy. In fact, if he worked the numbers on the tablet bit, it looked like it had been almost exactly 1,000 years since the last time the divine tree had bloomed. This was really heartening. Toby had really been stressed about getting that whole tail beast thing worked out. Toby had already tried to follow the plan, but had gotten a bit confused and gone after the 9 tails first, which had been totally the wrong order. People were still pretty angry about that. Doesn't everyone make mistakes? Also, he still wasn't exactly certain why Lord Madara hadn't wanted to revive the dead until his plan was nearing completion. Well, whatever. This new plan seemed like a much better option anyway. There was just one problem. Toby sighed, his face deepening into an exaggerated frown of sheer sorrow. He really didn't know where that tree was. The tablet didn't say. He only knew that it wasn't in the elemental kingdoms. Since it wasn't here, even searching for it would be nigh impossible. Everyone knew there was no way to leave the island chain that contained the entirety of ninja culture. It's not fair, Toby shouted, echoing the cavern. The air, which had been souring rapidly as the visitor overstayed his welcome, vibrated indignantly from the disturbance. Every time I think I have a good plan, there's always some stupid reason it won't work. Then he saw it. There was something else carved into the floor beside the tablet. It was so shallow he almost hadn't seen it at all, like the writer had struggled to chisel into the tough-seeming stone. I knew it was true. The tree is the source of all, and celestial dragons keep it safe at their throne of power. I have come so far for this fragment of the truth, and I will carry this passage with me to the island at the very end of the world. G.O.L.D., Roger. What an unusual name, thought Toby. Many years later, the Uchiha clan compound. Uchiha Itachi sat with his back to a tree, feeling his blood trickle down to the ground. He'd failed, and now his death was certain. Worse still, he couldn't even say for sure that he had made the right decision. The Uchiha clan had been contemplating rebellion after a century of mistreatment and mistrust by the village at large. Danzo, Elder Konoha, had offered the dutiful Itachi a choice. Either he could silently assassinate the entirety of the Uchiha clan and take the burden of dishonor upon himself, or Konoha's forces would eradicate the clan, and the Uchiha would be known far and wide as traitors. Danzo, head of the shadowy root division of Konoha's secret police, had always been a hard negotiator. In the end, it had come down to a careful balance. If he agreed to do the village's dirty work, he could bargain for his brother's life. If he fought, there were no guarantees. Still, he had fought. Was that right? Would things have been better if had made another choice? The carnage was almost over now. Itachi had wounded Danzo in their confrontation, and the leader's bodyguards had pulled him back to the safety of Root's headquarters. Unfortunately, Itachi had not escaped unscathed. He knew, too, that his mother and father had been killed. Itachi couldn't call any of this a victory. Well, maybe there was one small victory. As he watched, young Sasuke crept tentatively out from the house basement's secondary exit. His brother had survived. Mother had shielded him from a blast. But Sasuke was peppered with burns. His face was a bloody mess. His left eye destroyed by shrapnel. Now, Sasuke approached, almost unable to believe what he saw. Sasuke, Itachi spoke, slowly and painfully. I need you to come here. I need you to listen to me. Sasuke nodded, tears running down his face, and approached. Listen, my little brother, I'm so glad you're safe. I have something I need from you. Consider this your first mission as a shinobi. I know you haven't yet graduated from the academy, but agree to do this for me. In my eyes, you'll already be a fully fledged ninja. Yes, I'll do it. I'll do anything. Just promise to stay alive. Good. I need you to do what I couldn't. Keep you safe. This is a high-rank, deep cover assignment. You know how important that is, right? Sasuke nodded fiercely, eyes wide. This would be messy. There was no way around. The village elders had wanted a clean break with the Uchiha clan. Something that would have saved face for the village. The reputation of both Konoha and the Uchiha clan would remain the pristine, pure white of funereal robes. And young Sasuke would live a pitted but treasured existence as the last of the glorious Uchiha. He twitched with spasms of pain and guilt. He had ruined that. Konoha would certainly lose face for this open infighting. But it would be the Uchiha as a whole who would bear the resentment of the villagers. The Hokage would have no choice now but to disclose the Uchiha plan's rebellion, to justify this botched assault to the other noble clans, such as the Hyuga and the Aburame. To do otherwise would tear the village apart at the seams. Sasuke would live life being doubted and mistrusted every step of the way. This could only end in his younger brother's death. Itachi took a deep, shuddering breath before he spoke. These are the principles you must follow. Graduate from the academy. Train hard. Learn well. Become strong. Be the loyal Konoha ninja that everyone will want to see. Do not disobey orders. Yes, I was going to do that anyway. There's more. Another deep breath. Rack your pain. When you are ready, leave. Leave the village. Go far away. Erase your presence. When Lord Hokage dies, so too will your protection. The village will be glad to seal away the final memories of the Uchiha clan. Itachi became quiet for a moment, a genuine smile seeming to cross his face. There was a man who I looked up to. I don't know why I even remember him now. He was just passing through, and I must have been 2 or 3 years old at the time, but I remember it as clearly as if it were yesterday. His name was Raja, and he told me things that seemed like an impossible dream. Itachi paused, lost in thought for a moment. Sasuke, the world is so much larger than this. So much larger than this village. And you'd never even know it. Even if they send you on missions outside the country, the only thing you'll learn about the people there is how to kill and deceive them. I wanted to see the world, and I thought I might meet that man again someday. But Itachi began coughing painfully, before silencing his younger brother's cries of horror with a raised hand. Sasuke, see the world. Do it in my place. Promise me that you'll get away from this before you get hurt. Big brother, don't talk like that. I can't live without help. I won't. Don't make me do this. Sasuke slammed his fist into ground as he screamed. Itachi fixed his eyes upon Sasuke, who was now so distraught that he no longer clutched at his ruined eye. Help? Yes, I can help you. I want to give you something. Consider it an early graduation present, or an apology. Just stop. Stay with me. No, little brother. Suddenly, Itachi moved as if he were uninjured, sitting up quickly and grabbing Sasuke firmly with one hand. I'm so sorry. I love you. Please, find something else worth living for. With 2 fingers extended, blood dripping down his hand, Itachi tapped his little brother right between the eyes. Then everything went black for the youngest Uchiha. The 3rd Hokage arrived at a scene of utter devastation. This was a catastrophe. He had not expected Danzu to launch an attack prematurely. Hiruzen and some of his most loyal agents had been delayed in a final closed meeting to make one last case for an alternative solution to the Uchiha problem that did not rely on genocide. He saw now that this attack had been timed perfectly to ensure he received the news of the assault too late to change the course of events. Disgraceful, it was clear that Danzu could no longer be trusted to work within the system. This was monstrous, but Hiruzen knew he should have seen this coming. The evidence of his abject failure to do so lay bare before him. The overwhelming majority of the dead and dying around him weren't even ninja, just civilians. He didn't care what that devious wolf had to say in his own defense. Danzu would not be able to hide in the shadows and have others shoulder the blame this time. Turning to the 24 Umbu operatives standing by, he spoke. Spread out. 3-man teams. Stop this immediately. You have my full authority to use lethal force. Signal for medical attention as necessary. End this. His face hardened as he turned to look towards his agents and took a deep breath. Disperse. Wordlessly, the masked operatives flickered away. A storm of leaves the only mark of their departure. Too much had been lost this night. Hiruzen felt as though he had just had to amputate a limb. He moved further into the village, walking alone. He had verified that Danzu and the majority of Root had already vacated the area, and there was no one left with both the ability and inclination to attack him. Moving in silence, he approached the residence of clan head Uchiha Fugaku. His face fell as he approached the clan head's house. Hiruzen saw a young child, smeared in blood, heaving deep sobs while holding a body that was so bloody as to be almost unidentifiable. Moving closer, he saw the body had once been Uchiha Itachi. His eyes were closed, and his slack face betrayed the remnants of a mysterious smile. What a waste to see that the promising young man was now clearly just another casualty among many. Hiruzen had never been one to shed tears when others were clearly in greater pain around him. Nevertheless, he knew they would come later. We were supposed to protect the village, he murmured. We were supposed to protect them all, but how can anything be said to protect a village if it sacrifices so many of its people? Danzu, was the danger that you saw really so great as to be worth this cost? Hearing his voice, the young, sobbing Uchiha Sasuke opened his eyes and looked up in shock, still taking deep, gasping gulps of air. What Hiruzen saw in that child's eyes caused his jaw to drop and his wrinkled face to contort in astonishment. The child's face was red and swollen from tears, the left side caked with blood. Within his right eye socket, the child's deep black eye was filled with irreconcilable sadness as one who had just lost everything. Within the left glowed the dark red kaleidoscope pattern of a Manjiki Sharingan, fading slowly away into nothingness. The boy collapsed, completely drained of chakra just in the effort of opening his new eye. Hiruzen gulped down his initial shock and stilled himself. This was without precedence. This information must not be allowed to leave his most trusted circles. Hiruzen returned to the staging area outside the Uchiha compound. Leaving the worst of the smell of blood and smoke behind him, Ambu operatives had returned and were serving as guards to Medicnine or standing watch. Several surviving Uchiha clan members and one unfortunate Ambu ninja were receiving urgent treatment before being sent back to the hospital. Sarutobi Asuma saw his father approach, carrying an unconscious young child. One look at his father told him that something unusual had happened. Get this child cared for by someone you can trust, his father said. Check his eye and assume acute, possibly dangerous, chakra exhaustion. He should remain under guard until the situation stabilizes. I need you back at my office as soon as you can return. Asuma nodded silently, knowing better than to press for more information. One look told him everything he needed to know. What next, Lord Hokage? Hiruzen looked at his son with a grave expression. Next, we light the signal fire for our counterattack. It was a time to gain the advantage. It was a time for action. It was a time to wage war. But the third Hokage knew better. Danzu was a shadow, an illusion, nothing more. Most people in Konoha would not even know his name. Hiruzen knew what people call those who wage war on shadows. They call them fools. So it was not a time for war. It was not a time for action. It was a time for something far worse. It was a time for meetings. And so the once retired third Hokage of the village of Konoha gathered his weapons and prepared to wage peace upon his foes. The Hokage donned his armor for this battle, his robe and hat of office. It would be made clear to all that he spoke as leader of the village. He gathered his most trusted allies and enacted a plan made years before, one that he had often hoped to never have the opportunity to use. Perhaps, if everything had gone smoothly for Root, perhaps, if Danzu had succeeded in forcing poor Itachi to betray his clan, perhaps then this might not have worked. But that was not the world they lived in. Danzu had stepped out of line in acting alone. But Hiruzen knew that the elders would forgive his success, only pretending at disapproval, doing what needed to be done, even if he was hated for it. It was ever Danzu's idiom, after all. But he hadn't succeeded, had he? At least, not cleanly. Hiruzen sighed to himself. If he had learned one thing during all his time as leader of Konoha, it was this. When it came to effecting social change, not even the most dreaded of Uchiha mind-altering illusions could ever hope to compare with the raw might of several powerful people coming together to complain in the middle of the night. Hiruzen stood up from his desk and stretched his old bones. On the writing desk before him lay several scrolls. Now it was time to give them all the same thing to complain about. Hawks flew through the night. Midnight messengers knocked at gates. By this point, anyone important had heard something and was already dressed and prepared for the worst. The prospect of civil war tends to make people rest uneasy. The village elders, minus Danzu, were interrupted in the act of calling an emergency council meeting by an urgent messenger who informed them all that the third Hokage had just summoned them to an emergency council meeting. Throughout the village, numerous clan heads received long-expected messengers carrying unexpected messages. Group after group left clan compounds with scowls on their faces. If they were going to be up in the middle of the night, the least they could do was yell at someone about it. So it was that the emergency council meeting was interrupted as the doors to the council chamber crashed open. The village elders sat, exchanging nervous glances with one another as the Hyuga clan head entered. The Hokage sat, stone-faced. "This is an outrage," roared Hyuga Hayashi, blood pounding through his veins. "Is this how Konoha wishes to treat its bloodline clans? Are the Hyuga next in line?" One elder managed to get her thoughts together swiftly enough to respond. "Unfortunately, we had information to suggest that the Uchiha were planning an uprising or rebellion against Dash. And so you slaughtered them?" The head of the Hyuga clan had now clearly activated to be a Kugen. The treasure-white eyes that gave him a supreme edge in combat and reconnaissance. I may not have always agreed with the Uchiha, and in fact I might have occasionally despised them, but we both have the honor of being founding members of Konoha. Uprising? Rebellion against the village? Ridiculous. Our families are the village. Several Hyuga clan members stood behind him, stoic and motionless, though they did not seem to be staring at any council member in particular. To be a Kugen meant you never could quite tell. And now, by all my information, they are essentially gone, never to recover their strength. How many remain? 10? 20? Please inform me what I must do for my family to avoid a visit from ANBU in the middle of the night, because I would regret the inconvenience of having to pile the corpses of your trained assassins outside my gate in the morning. Or does this too count as talk of rebellion? The elders watched, wide-eyed. The Hokage was next to speak. "I apologize to you as well as to the entire village. A specific ANBU leader took action against my explicit orders. This was my failure, and my first priority will be erasing this problem, even if I must dig it out by its roots." "Oh, I expect that you will. I know all about this. Danzu's gone too far this time. He should make sure he doesn't give me cause to deal with him myself. I expect this matter to be resolved by the end of the day tomorrow." Shooting a final glance to certain elders, Hayashi escorted himself out of the building. The door slammed shut behind him. Taking a deep breath, the elders exchanged a weary glance. The Hokage did not move a single inch. After a time, the one of the elders spoke up. Well, that was certainly Dash. He was frozen in mid-sentence by blood-curdling canine howls coming from outside, just before the doors slammed open once again. Again, they were interrupted by a clan leader with demands. and again, and again, and again, behind his steepled fingers. The third Hokage allowed the smallest of smiles to flicker across his deeply wrinkled face. Root had faced a much harder fight than expected. In isolating the entire population of the Uchiha clan for the attack, they had neglected something crucial. Blood, loss, and death were, in a way, the crucible in which Uchiha power was forged. It was a fan to their flame. That night, every link of love was a trap. Every person inside that compound and upset waiting to happen. The truth was, though many of the Uchiha managed to earn their Sharingan during their careers as ninja, the heart-rending personal loss and desperation that led to its further evolution was usually a blessedly rare occurrence. That night, no fewer than 10 pairs of Manjiki Sharingan activated from those who failed to protect those closest to them. Each one brought new powers to the fray, untested, random, and furious. All in all, it had been a terrible night for everyone involved. It was less than 3 hours after the council meeting had ended before a drastically weakened Root was dug out of its hole. Despite everything, Danza had escaped. As night turned into morning, Danzu was caught in an underground laboratory, spattered with blood, scavenging for the corpses of several Uchiha. He disappeared before he could be pinned down, and no one knew what would come of it all. The next step came swiftly afterward. Hiruza knew that everything Danza did was what he believed to be good for the village. Danzu and his Root had seemed like necessary evils, but his actions were no longer even predictable. Root must be dissolved, its members and functions carefully incorporated into ANBU. A kill order for Danzu was signed shortly thereafter. It would be quite a few years before Konoha got any intel at all on Danzu's whereabouts. The Uchiha had been crushed. Fewer than 20 individuals had survived the chaos of that night. Every single capable combatant had been killed protecting or avenging their families. Though the other clans were quite willing to help punish those who had been responsible for the slaughter, their sense of responsibility did not extend to fighting for the Uchiha's well-being. The rebellious clan was quietly separated and watched carefully for further signs of collaboration. Young Sasuke was not given to any distant relation, fostered, or abandoned to an orphanage. A week after the massacre, he found himself desperately alone, curled up on a mat inside a sparsely furnished apartment in a rundown building he'd never seen before in his life. Tears still came from time to time, but he had been surprised to find that you really could only cry for so long before it all started to run out. It was all just the same afterward. One thing was new, though. He discovered it was possible to both feel immense loneliness and not want to see any other person all at the same time. His emotions were both wild and dull, as well as being wholly unpredictable. This time it was rage that boiled up inside him when he heard the raucous knocking at his door. It demanded attention. Sasuke ignored it nonetheless. The people who had been watching him would just open the door if they want to come in. The wild knocking continued, seemingly without pattern or rhythm, as the seconds lengthened into minutes. Seriously, what the hell was up with this person? Sasuke had not yet even taken a single music lesson, but he felt certain you could only pound on a door for so long before developing a pattern or something. He was pretty sure his brother had told him that high-level shinobi had to train for years just to prevent themselves from falling into even the slightest of patterns. Well, maybe the intelligence and interrogation people like to come down and try to decode this, because he sure as hell couldn't. The knocking continued. Now, there was whistling to go along with it. The knocker was clearly settling in for the long haul. Eyes wide, brow furrowed. Still curled up on the floor, Sasuke ground his teeth together. Maybe this was torture? Or some genjutsu? He doubted his brother had ever had to train to resist people knocking off key he had. For whistling off key, basic genjutsu training. Or making stupid noises really loudly, saved his life twice already. Finally, Sasuke got up and answered the door. What do you want? The grin that stared back at him was not actually more irritating than anything he had experienced in the last week. But he could, perhaps, be forgiven for not making a distinction at that moment. The new child adjusted a pair of goggles that were stuck awkwardly in a pile of messy blonde hair, and he seemed extremely satisfied with himself. He began shouting immediately. Hey, new neighbor, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm going to become the Hokage someday. Nice to meet ya. If this scene had occurred 5 years later, Naruto would have watched dumbfounded as he witnessed the birth of Sasuke's Sharingan. Unfortunately, today's Sasuke really only had one option. In Naruto's mind, it seemed just a bit of an overreaction when Sasuke screamed right in his face and bull rushed him back into the hallway. Crashing straight through the open window opposite his door seemed unwarranted too. But hey, whatever. Being punched repeatedly on the way down to the street was just the icing on top of an already complete surprise attack from his perch on a nearby building. Sarutobi Asuma winced as he watched the two screaming children come hurtling through the second-story window to land in a pile of packing material down below. Asuma really hoped his father knew what he was doing with this one. Years later, neither Sasuke nor Naruto would remember this day very accurately, due to a haze of bloodlust and head trauma, respectively. They would, however, agree that they couldn't really imagine where things would turn out. Both were, in a certain way, outcasts. Now, they were outcast together. Young Sasuke was not given any distant relation, fostered, or abandoned to an orphanage. A week after the massacre, he found himself desperately alone, curled up on a mat inside a sparsely furnished apartment in a rundown building he'd never seen before in his life. The tears still came from time to time, but he'd been surprised to find that you really could only cry for so long before it all started to run out. It was all just the same after a while. One thing was new, though. He discovered it was possible to both feel immense loneliness and not want to see any other person at all at the same time. His emotions were both wild and dull, as well as being wholly unpredictable. This time it was rage that boiled up inside of him when he heard the raucous knocking at his door. It demanded attention. Sasuke ignored it nonetheless. The people who had been watching him would just open the door if they want to come in. The wild knocking continued, seemingly without pattern or rhythm, as the seconds lengthened into minutes. Seriously, what the hell was up with this person? Sasuke had not yet even taken a single music lesson, but he felt certain he could only pound on a door for so long before developing a pattern or something. He was pretty sure his brother had told him that high-level shinobi have to train for years just to prevent themselves from falling into even the slightest of patterns. Well, maybe the intelligence and interrogation people would like to come down and try to decode this, because he sure as hell couldn't. The knocking continued. Now, there was whistling to go along with it. The knocker was clearly settling in for the long haul. Eyes wide, brow furrowed, still curled up on the floor, Sasuke ground his teeth together. Maybe this was torture or some genjutsu. He doubted his brother had ever had to train to resist people knocking off beat he had, or whistling off key in basic genjutsu training, or making stupid noises really loudly, saved his life twice already. Finally, Sasuke got up and answered the door. What do you want? The grin that stared back at him was not actually more irritating than anything he had experienced in the last week, but he could, perhaps, be forgiven for not making a distinction at that moment. The new child adjusted a pair of goggles that were stuck awkwardly in a pile of messy blonde hair, and he seemed extremely satisfied with himself. He began shouting immediately, "Hey, a new neighbor, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm going to become the Hokage someday. Nice to meet ya." If this scene had occurred 5 years later, Naruto would have watched dumbfounded as he witnessed the birth of Sasuke's Sharingan. Unfortunately, today's Sasuke really only had one option. In Naruto's mind, it seemed just a bit of an overreaction when Sasuke screamed right in his face and bull rushed him back into the hallway. Crashing straight through the open window opposite his door seemed unwarranted too. But hey, whatever. Being punched repeatedly on the way down to the street was just the icing on top of an already complete surprise attack from his perch on a nearby building. Sarutobi Asuma winced as he watched the two screaming children come hurtling through the second-story window to land in a pile of packing material down below. Asuma really hoped his father knew what he was doing with this one. Years later, neither Sasuke nor Naruto would remember this day very accurately, due to a haze of bloodlust and head trauma, respectively. They would, however, agree that they couldn't really imagine where things would have gone without it. Both were, in a certain way, outcasts. Now, they were outcast together. Young Sasuke was not given any distant relation, fostered, or abandoned to an orphanage. A week after massacre, he found himself desperately alone, curled up on a mat inside a sparsely furnished apartment in a rundown building he'd never seen before in his life. The tears still came from time to time, but he had been surprised to find that he really could only cry for so long before it all started to run out. It was all just the same after a while. One thing was new though. He discovered it was possible to both feel immense loneliness and not want to see any other person at all at the same time. His emotions were both wild and dull, as well as being wholly unpredictable. This time was rage that boiled up inside of him when he heard the raucous knocking at his door. It demanded attention. Sasuke ignored it nonetheless. The people who had been watching him would just open the door if they want to come in. The wild knocking continued, seemingly without pattern or rhythm, as the seconds lengthened into minutes. Seriously, what the hell was up with this person? Sasuke had not yet even taken a single music lesson, but he felt certain you could only pound on a door for so long before developing a pattern or something. He was pretty sure his brother had told him that high-level shinobi have to train for years just to prevent themselves from falling into even the slightest of patterns. Well, maybe the intelligence and interrogation people would like to come down and try to defocus, because he sure as hell couldn't. The knocking continued. Now, there was whistling to go along with it. The knocker was clearly settling in for the long haul. Eyes wide, brow furrowed. Still curled up on the floor, Sasuke ground his teeth together. Maybe this was torture? Or some genjutsu? He doubted his brother had ever had to train to resist people knocking off the pad. Or whistling off key? Basic genjutsu training. Or making stupid noises really loudly, save his life twice already. Finally, Sasuke got up and answered the door. What do you want? The grin that stared back at him was not actually more irritating than anything he had experienced in the last week, but he could, perhaps, be forgiven for not making a distinction at that moment. The new child adjusted a pair of goggles that were stuck awkwardly in a pile of messy blonde hair, and he seemed extremely satisfied with himself. He began shouting immediately, "Hey, a new neighbor. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm going to become the Hokage someday. Nice to meet ya." If this scene had occurred 5 years later, Naruto would have watched dumbfounded as he witnessed the birth of Sasuke's Sharingan. Unfortunately, today's Sasuke really only had one option. In Naruto's mind, it seemed just a bit of an overreaction when the Sasuke screamed right in his face and bull rushed him back into the hallway. Crashing straight through the open window opposite his door seemed unwarranted too, but hey, whatever. Being punched repeatedly on the way down to the street was just the icing on top of an already complete surprise attack from his perch on a nearby building. Sarutobi Asuma winced as he watched the two screaming children come hurtling through the second-story window to land in a pile of packing material down below. Asuma really hoped his father knew what he was doing with this one. Years later, neither Sasuke nor Naruto would remember this day very accurately. Due to a haze of bloodlust and head trauma, respectively, they would, however, agree that they couldn't really imagine where things would have gone without it. Both were, in a certain way, outcasts. Now, they were outcast together. Dash 4 years later, Hatake Kakashi looked up from the dossier in front of him. One eye covered by his customary forehead protector, despite a face that was more hidden than not. His skepticism was plain to see. "Sir, this is what you wanted me for." The Hokage grinned to see his reaction. He had risen and aged a fair bit in just the last 4 years, but the amusement filled his wrinkled face with life. "Yes, I rather think you like this bunch, Kakashi. Uruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto." He frowned for a moment before stating his thoughts. "Sir, this is a suspicious assignment." "Oh, why would you think that?" "The two boys," queried Kakashi. "Is something wrong with them?" The Hokage asked, pleasantly puzzled. "So, you thought Kakashi was going to be like that, was it? Weren't they the ones who convinced those two Chunin that one of the Inuzuka family houses was actually the agent from Jimmy Stone wearing a, quote, clever disguise?" "Oh, yes, certainly. Certainly very good training for the summon of our teams. But they were also the ones who made a habit of sneaking bird shit onto the robes of visiting dignitaries. Children's games being what they are," the Hokage chuckled and waved a dismissive hand. Surely you know they stopped when we asked them? Their game had not actually ended. As such, the two had just started a business charging other kids for the pleasure of participating in the game and awarded money out of the pot for successful runs. One look at the Hokage's unwavering smile told him he wasn't going to get anywhere pushing on that front. Though, Kakashi launched another desperate attack. They were the ones who diverted the daimyo's biennial inspection tour into the red light district. Oh, you know nothing was never proven. Hiruzen's smile seemed rather strained. Suddenly, Naruto burst into the academy offices and admitted it himself. Why? Young boys will admit to anything if they think it makes them seem on top of the world. The Hokage gently shook his head. I know for a fact they told all those girls that everyone would be a Kugan or Sharingan can see through their clothes. Kakashi added, more as a forlorn hope than anything. The Hokage sighed loudly. Kakashi, I dash, he paused to rub his wrinkled forehead. Look, I trust you. You know that. Kakashi nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. In a world where trust was normally a fleeting and tenuous thing, the third had every reason to trust him implicitly. I assume that this is about the Nine Tails, he asked warily. Yes and no. True, that's part of it. But, well, to be frank, we do manage to keep a few secrets around here, and I've been sitting on a couple of good ones. Long story very short is that the boy Naruto is a child your mentor, Minato. I believe that this is unknown even to the boy himself. Kakashi raised his eyebrows. Honestly, once it had been said, it seemed almost obvious. It had just never really come to his attention before now. Kakashi, I hardly need to tell you that as the son of the fourth and the newest Jinchuriki for the Nine-Tailed Fox, it is crucial that he learns the skills he needs to help his village. And the Uchiha boy, he glanced down. Is he just there as a friend? The Hokage chuckled bitterly to himself for a moment. No, not quite, though there's that as well. The truth is that young Sasuke has inherited a rather troublesome item from his older brother, and would benefit well from your unique experiences. It was a moment before Kakashi made his connection. Uchiha Itachi. The rest was easy to figure out. He got his brother's eye? Really? Yes. And it's a very special one indeed. The Manjikyu, famed kaleidoscope of the Uchiha. Not that I need to tell you that. When he received it, it was in the process of changing into something else. But the poor boy didn't have the chakra to sustain the transformation. Happened the night of the attack. What a tragedy it was. With a small grunt, he stood up from his desk and walked over to his window before he continued talking. Now, I've tried to make life easy for the boys, but it's not just about me. No medicine to cure pig-headedness, as you know. What with all the anti-Uchiha sentiment in the council, it's just not my jurisdiction. I'm a ninja, not a nursemaid, after all. Still, now that they're graduating the academy, it finally becomes my jurisdiction rather neatly, doesn't it? He grinned, looking back over his shoulder. You know, young Sasuke is named after my father. I know that, sir. I have high hopes that he will bring honor to the name.
Guess what,
This gave Kakashi pause. That kind of statement was fairly difficult to ignore in this context. He probably had to at least try with this group. Still, he had to know. The girl? Sakura? The Hokage shook his head. Just a normal girl for her age. Good grades. Just a normal girl? Just a normal girl. Good grades. Kakashi looked down at the dossier again. The Hokage spoke. I can see you're already thinking. Good. I won't keep you here any longer, but please give this your best effort. Kakashi left the office with a grimace. Uchiha Sasuke, excellent student, at least in practice. Not anywhere near what his older brother had been at his age, but that probably wasn't a fair comparison. Not top of the class, but close. His teachers were the opinion that his association with Naruto was dragging him down, but he should be an asset to any team. He'd acquired a few of the Uchiha signature fire element jutsu, which was promising. He was also developing a bit of following from some girls who liked the appeal of the bad boy, but Kakashi didn't think he was taking advantage of it. Speaking of, Haruno Sakura, good grades, true, but lacking in physical skill. Honestly, Kakashi wasn't sure what to think about her. Normal girl. Might be tricky. Kakashi had never had any experience with being normal, well, anything, really, given the severity of his own upbringing. It was difficult to even think of her as being a true young kunoichi, though that too was probably unfair. Still, it was hard to imagine a ninja more unlike him. Then there was Uzumaki Naruto. Kakashi took a look at the dossier picture that showed the young kid posing in kabuki makeup. For whatever reason, known troublemaker and loudmouth with a lack of respect for authority. Other than that, it was hard to look at his actual evaluation and think anything other than bland. No special jutsu or trained fighting style. Physically, he seemed confident enough. But even his mediocre grades were probably only a result of Sasuke's good influence. Put the two of them together, he thought, and the result might turn out just a bit like his old teammate, Abito. At that thought, he brought his hand up to his covered eye. Ataki Kakashi considered the most important virtue for potential students to be teamwork. More specifically, the ability to stick together with your team no matter what. He'd once thought that a ninja needed to be able to throw away an ally to complete the mission if necessary. But some rather serious losses had made him realize that that kind of thinking just wasn't workable in the long run. It was amazing how many ways there were to escape from impossible situations when you stopped thinking of them as impossible. Not to mention that it was so rare that succeeding in a mission was actually worth the cost of the village of losing a skilled shinobi with decades of work put into raising them. No, it was lack of trust that your comrades were looking out for your best interests that tended to break up teams faster than even the most dangerous of missions. Sasuke and Naruto were already friends. It wouldn't do any good to try and test that teamwork. Still, he needed ninjas that would fight for their fellows because they were teammates, not because they were friends. Well, in that case, the answer was obvious. 2 days later. It was a beautiful day to be outside in training area number 5. The warm air was dry, and the breeze was cool, carrying the varied scent of a village that was gearing up for lunch. Some parts of the training ground would make excellent places for an outdoor meal away from the academy, where one could think in solitude. Well, except for the possibility of explosions. Anyway, all in all, it was a wonderful day, not for the potential members of Team 7. Though, oh no, not for them. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura were being put to hell on earth, and Kakashi thought it was hilarious. Oh, they had performed well enough so far, but the main event was just now starting. Naruto and Sasuke had just returned to main clearing to see their missing partner, Sakura, gagged and tied to a wooden pole. As they approached, the earth shook and heaved, launching the two boys into the air without warning. Sasuke barely managed to land on his feet, though Naruto hit the ground in a tumbling impact that he tried and failed to pass off as a roll. It would have gone a bit better if he hadn't slammed into the pole that Sakura was currently pinned to. As Naruto climbed to his feet, spitting out dirt and muttering something about splinters, Kakashi appeared before them in a cloud of smoke. He looked upon his scowling charges and began his prepared speech. Well, I think congratulations on you. That actually wasn't half bad. You've got good teamwork. I've almost seen enough. Another few months of training, and you two might actually be trusted to hold kunai the right way around the first try. Naruto's grimace intensified, and he spat out a wet blob of dirt. Sasuke blinked, puzzled by what he had heard. After a moment, Sakura's eyes widened in understanding. Yes, I said you two for a reason. Sakura, I'm afraid that your showing was pathetic. A shinobi can always build on strengths and compensate for weaknesses. But all that becomes impossible if a student can't bring herself to take even basic offensive action. You were clearly out of your element there. I'm taking you out of the test. I'm sorry, but I strongly recommend that you reconsider becoming a ninja altogether. Sakura let out a pitiful muffled moan around the gag, currently keeping her from speaking. Before long, her eyes were filling with tears of frustration and shame. It wasn't fair to expect her to work well with two boys who were already friends. Sakura thought. She didn't even know them. Kakashi turned to regard Naruto and Sasuke. You too. I'm out. I will be back in 20 minutes for one more try. Use that time to put together a final plan of attack. Impress me. Kakashi turned as if to leave, then paused. Oh, And if you're thinking of helping your failed partner there, I'd advise against it. An unprepared teammate will just get you killed. It's too late for the three of you together. But I might be able to grab a third member from another instructor. So, to be clear, if you include her in your planning, then I'm failing both of you. Sometimes, the mission requires you to leave people behind. This is one of those times. With that, Kakashi disappeared, too fast for their eyes to follow. Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other, jaws clenched. Naruto was the first to say what they were both thinking. Man, screw that guy. Asshole. Sasuke agreed, then scanned the tree line for signs of their instructor. Seeing nothing, he joined Naruto at the post. In moments, they had begun cutting the tough ropes binding their teammate. Sakura's eyes were wide and worried, and Sasuke quickly undid the knot on the gag. "No, why you can't do this?" she said. "You heard Kakashi-sensei. I can't... I'm not on the team anymore. If you help me, then you'll both fail." Naruto grinned, wickedly. "What's that, Sakura? It's a little weird that you want us to keep you tied up, don't you think?" Sasuke rolled his eyes. "Naruto, I know for a fact that you don't know what you're talking about. So why don't you stop bothering her?" "Hey, you don't know whether I know what I'm talking about or not. So why don't you quit pretending?" "Oh, yeah." Sasuke grit out, working his kunai through the ropes near her feet. "Well, explain it then, if you think you're so cool." Naruto was silent for a moment. "No way. I'm not going to explain it in front of a girl." "Naruto, you were just making a joke about it at her expense." "Well, she's blushing now, so I don't want to be mean. I can be a gentleman, too, you know." "Excuse me, Dad," Sakura interrupted, "but if I'm blushing, it's because I just had the worst day of my life, and now I'm probably going to be expelled." She had no idea what the other two were talking about, but it sounded like they didn't either. So that was all right. "Why are you doing this?" "I was practically useless back there, and the teacher said I'd just get you both killed." "Look," said Sasuke, "I don't know what his deal is, but I've heard things about him. He's never passed a team before, and I think he's just a sour, lazy bastard who set this up to be unwinnable. And there's no way I'm about to listen to a guy that just dumped me in a hole and had his dog piss on me," growled Naruto. "Yeah, you stink, by the way." "Oh, shut up. You didn't do much better after he stuck his hand up your ass." Sasuke was silent. This time, Sakura really felt awkward for listening in. After a moment, Sasuke finished cutting to the last rope, and Sakura fell to the ground, landing unsteadily. When she stood back up, Sasuke continued. "If he really wants to fail us, then he's going to do it either way. And, sorry, but if he thinks you're useless, then maybe we can use that against him. I don't really have a plan that I expect to work here, but we've got another 15 minutes to figure one out. Everyone okay with that?" Naruto nodded. Sakura, her face screwed up in frustration, tears still sliding down her cheeks, joined in a moment later. Together, as a team, they huddled together for one last planning session. Their deliberation was short-lived. With a roar of thunder, the sky darkened and the earth shook. Everywhere around them, nature expressed its fury. Half a mile away in the city, shopkeepers serving lunch shook their heads in exasperation. Ninja business. With a bucking of the earth around the terrified trio, their teacher erupted from the shattered ground. "That is it for today. Let me know if you want more."